trying to pull it back.
Recording in progress.
Okay, we're good.
Now we're good. All right, this time we're calling the special meeting of September 27th, 2021 to order. Councilmember Resendez, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Perez,
Here.
Councilmember Burns,
Here.
Vice Mayor Resendez,
Present.
Mayor Velasquez,
Here.
City Manager Miller,
Here?
Chief of Police Reynoso,
Here.
and the record will show City Attorney Epperson is absent.
Thank you. Verification of agenda posting.
The agenda for the City of Hollister City Council special meeting of September 27th was posted on the bulletin board on September 24th, 2021 at 1:10 p.m. per Government Code Section 54956. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to item A1.
Thank you, Mayor. So the council will receive a presentation on the stormwater, including regulations, requirements, storm system, and the MS4 permit. And we have Carrie Wagner from Wallace to do that, start that presentation off. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, staff. My name is Carrie Wagner. I'm with Wallace Group, and today we are going to do a workshop on all things stormwater. We'll wait till the presentation is up. Remote's on. All right. So as you know, Wallace Group has been working with the city for many years, over a decade now, and doing your utility master plans, stormwater being one of the major elements, and we've been working with the city on many different facets of the stormwater components within your system, including your infrastructure and the regulatory requirements. So today, we are going to do a presentation overview of the storm drain system. We're going to talk about the regulatory requirements, your MS4 stormwater program, post-construction requirements, watershed plan, trash amendments, projects that are currently in design, the stormwater grant program, and the Greater Hollister Area Stormwater Resource Plan, which is actually the driving factor to why we are doing this workshop today. So a quick update on the storm drain system itself. Back several years ago, Wallace Group completed a storm drain master plan. Your system is comprised of 59 plus miles of storm drain piping, various diameters, over 1,200 storm drain manholes, over 1,800 storm drain inlets, 8 drainage basins, of which 4 of them are terminal basins and 4 are detention basins. Meaning the water comes in them, it will fill up, and then it'll flow back out to the river. And then you have 20 river outfalls. 8 of them flow to the San Benito River, and 12 of them flow to the Santa Ana Creek, all of which, both of those are tributary to the Pajaro River downstream, down into, goes down into Santa Cruz County, Monterey County. So what have we done today to work, what work has been completed today? In 2011, we did your storm drain master plan. We identified 19 capital improvement projects that had to do with stormwater. You can see a couple of the streets. Fortunately, back in 2011 was a very wet, or 2010 was a very wet rain year. And so we actually were able to get several pictures of flooding areas, areas of concern. The city has since then completed one of those projects, which was the 4th Street Improvement Project, CIP 1609 and 1612. This was a road improvement project, as well as it addressed stormwater improvements. Glenn Ryder has been working with the city over the past few years assisting the city with the MS4 compliance. He unfortunately is out sick, so I am going to attempt to convey the MS4 stormwater permits, but I am not the expert on it, so please be gentle with me on this subject matter. So what is an MS4? It's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, M with 4 S's. This is the conveyance or system of publicly owned storm drain, gutters, roadside ditches, grassy swales, sediment ponds, and similar features. As stormwater flows over the land, it collects water, stormwater, which also collects a mixture of pollutants deposited by the landscape, natural and human activities. So you've got the oils, the greases from the cars, you've got fertilizers, you've got dog waste, so forth. All of that gets picked up in the stormwater, and that flows to your gutters, your drainage system, and flows out to the creeks. These systems provide essential drainage and stormwater management for urban and suburban areas and must handle fluctuating precipitation events, meaning, you know, your stormwater system has got to be able to handle a wide variety of storm events over the years. So what is the background with an MS4 permit? This is something that's on the newer side for municipalities. Back in the early 2000s, the Clean Water Act was a federal act that was enacted, and the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System for MS4s. Phase 1 is over 100,000. You guys are in phase 2, which is 20,000 to 100,000 population. This enacted the construction general permit. Subsequently, then which the California MS4 general permit includes total maximum daily loads, the trash capture order, and the regional order for the post-construction requirements. Those orders have come subsequent to the early 2000s when the California Water Act was enacted, implementing the MS4 permits. Included in there is also the California Construction General Permit, which is oftentimes you'll hear the construction-based, the SWIPs, Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plans. So these are all regulations that the city, as well as construction, either pre-construction, post-construction, have to comply with, as well as the city operations. So this is where we're all regulating different forms of stormwater before and after construction. By the way, if you guys have any questions as we're going, this is a workshop. It's meant to be interactive. Feel free to interrupt me, ask me questions. I'm happy to ask them as we're going through the workshop. Your MS4 system boundary. This is your city boundary. And what you're seeing is your city boundary and the various sub-watersheds within the city. All of these sub-watersheds flow to an outfall of some sort, and they go to the receiving water. So what is a receiving water? It's defined as a body of water such as an ocean, stream, river, pond, lake, and it's defined as where stormwater is discharged. This is where stormwater runoff collects and concentrates pollutants to impair recreational function of receiving water bodies by causing harm to aquatic life and potentially to humans. So that stormwater collects on your streets. It collects all those pollutants, the waste, the oils, the greases, everything collects into the stormwater, and it heads out to San Benito River, where then it infiltrates into the ground. When the river is running, it is included there. The aquatic life, everything is inhibited by the stormwater, by those pollutants. And when you get large concentrations, that's when you start seeing aquatic life being harmed by these pollutants. It's something as a society we need to protect the environment. So Hollister has two receiving waters, San Benito River and Santa Ana Creek. Those are the two rivers that we are focused on at this time. So I've talked about total maximum daily loads, and there's a lot of words on here. But basically what it is a list of constituents that we have to analyze, that we monitor, and there are total maximum daily load limits that can enter the stormwater that once we go above that, it becomes harmful. We've identified as being harmful to aquatic life. And so one of the largest in each of San Benito River and Santa Ana Creek, what you want to pull from this is the Fecal coliform in the sediment have been identified as total maximum daily loads. The city has frequently surpassed the total maximum daily loads for fecal coliform and sediment, which means it's picking up waste and that is entering into the creeks and river. And so the Regional Water Quality Control Board, which is the regulating body, has identified those as issues and constituents of concern for the city. So what are the minimum requirements for the MS4 stormwater program? It comes in two parts. The first part is what we have to measure. So we do planning, we do implementation, and then we assess it. There are 6 components to the first program. The first part is public education. That's why we send out newsletters in your water bills and so forth. We put information about trash capture, information about picking up your dog waste. This is all stemmed from these programs. Public outreach, again, it's why we're having this workshop. It's the public education. The more you know and understand about how your trash impacts the water quality, the more likely you are to go and pick up that piece of trash when you're walking down the street and cleaning up the streets. Illicit discharge detection and elimination. We want to make sure that there are no illicit discharges, wrongful discharges into our stormwater collection system, that we are monitoring those connections. Construction site stormwater controls. When a project is under construction, we do not want sediment running off of those project sites and into your storm drain system. That sediment is a major polluter to the river channels. As well as it's a maintenance nightmare to your operators, because they have to clean that sediment. It ends up settling out in your pipes, and it clogs up your storm drain pipes. The post-construction site stormwater controls. Again, when you construct a project that was once bare land, when it was bare land and stormwater hit that project site, the water would normally just stay on that site. It would infiltrate into the ground and percolate into the groundwater basin. When you develop it and you put houses, parking lots, all of this area, impermeable area, that now that stormwater hits all of that impermeable area and now has the ability to run off. Post-construction requirements, which Valerie is going to go a little bit more in depth on that in a little bit later. It identifies how you have to maintain that stormwater on site to match pre-construction requirements. And then good housekeeping and pollution prevention. This is on the city now. How does the city operate and maintain the storm drain collection system to provide good housekeeping and prevention? And that's creating operations and maintenance practices that operators and the city staff maintain. The part 2 of the MS4 stormwater program is quantification of the pollutant loads and estimation of pollutant load reductions achieved by the program as a whole. So now we have all of these 6 programs that are implemented. How do you actually identify whether or not they're working? So the city has a program software. It's run by Second Nature. It's a program where we have implemented and inputted all of your drainage information, all of your best management practices, the low impact development. Tell me if you don't understand some of these words that I'm throwing out there, but these are all stormwater improvements. We put them into a program that will identify what the loading is, how much, it tells you how much land, how much bare land you might have, how much development you might have, and it identifies how much pollutant loading you might have going to a specific outfall. And then what we do is, as the city is implementing new projects, we put those new projects into the program, and it then tells us how much reduction we've had in a pollutant loading. So we know where the highest pollutant loaded areas are based on topography, based on bare ground, based on the urbanization of the streets, many different factors that go into it. And then we identify and target what are the best management practices that we can implement either operationally or physical projects that we can do to put in, and then we identify where and how we're going to reduce those pollutant loadings. So that's part 2 of the program. So what has the city done to date? First off, we have a GIS-based storm drain model that has identified all of the watersheds within the entire city. We've done a quantitative analysis using a scientifically defensible pollutant load analysis, the Second Nature program, and we've prioritized the priority areas for required municipal inspections. So we have to go out every so often and actually inspect those detention basins, the physical facilities, full capture systems, whatever we might have. We have to actually physically go out and inspect those to make sure that they are living up to what their design parameters were. The city has prepared a TMDL WAP, which is a monitoring program that has to be done. The biggest thing is making sure that you do it after what we call the first flush. The first flush is the very first storm of a rainy season. That is the first storm that is going to carry the highest pollutant loading. You drive all summer long, all your cars are leaking oil, gas, everything, all the pollutants collect over the summer. That first storm is the one that's going to have the highest pollutant loading of the season. And so we call that the first flush. So that's the one that is most important to collect stormwater and treat it. We have the Illicit Discharge and Detection Elimination Plan. We've worked with compliance, working with the city for compliance. We've identified standard operation protocols for the municipal construction site inspection. So you have contractors who have come in, making sure that the city understands the standard operating procedures, the standard inspection requirements to ensure that they are meeting their construction general permit and installing the post-construction requirements, the stormwater requirements that are involved. Identified the long-term maintenance program tracking and inspection. The regional board is requiring that the city maintain the lists of all of these facilities that are needed for stormwater improvements. And so it's creating that standard tracking process and implementing that, and then there is reporting, there's audits by the regional board. The regional board will come out and actually do physical audits of your system, which they have in the past. We also have to do what we call a PAP. It's a Program Effectiveness Assessment and Improvement Plan. So we can install this infrastructure, but is it really doing what we expected it to do? So we have to go out and assess every year, so many years, we have to identify what that plan looks like to go out and assess to determine whether or not the program is actually being effective. And then there's MS4 stormwater annual permits. So Wallace Group has been assisting the city in developing those annual permits or annual reports that we submit to the regional board. Are there any questions before we move on to the next subject matter on MS4 or the work that we've done with the city? Yes, Roland.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for your presentation. It's very clear and concise, and I'm following along with you. I really appreciate that. I saw that in the beginning that you said there was 19 CIPs identified in 2011. There was only one of the 19 completed, if I'm understanding that correct?
At this time, only one CIP has been completed
Do we
to date.
know why? Because it's 10 years ago. Why did we identify and we've only completed one of those? Probably a staff question.
That is a staff question.
Yeah, part of it is funding, and then the other part is just getting it designed. But we're working on tying those right now to some of the road projects so we get our best bang for the buck.
Thank you. I do have a couple more. Fecal coliform, is that how you say it?
Fecal coliform, yes.
Okay. It's increased for the city.
And that's a normal, almost all cities have fecal coliform hits. So that's not unusual for the city, so.
Okay. You talked about what you're doing with the increased pollutant areas, so I appreciate that. And then I guess just so I can wrap my head around this. So after the water gets collected, and it goes, how do we treat it? We don't just, we collect it and then we let it go through the aquifers to the ground basin into the river, and then the river does the rest for
Yep.
us? We don't actually treat it. So both of those, Santa Ana Creek and the San Benito River, are both going to the Pajaro River,
Correct.
and that's what we do to treat stormwater?
Well, so stormwater in general, and you're going to learn a whole lot more about full capture systems.
Sure.
So one of the requirements that you're going to learn here just shortly is going to be about full capture systems. So the regional board has, established that most agencies collect the stormwater, it goes into your storm drain system, it goes out your outfalls, and it goes into the receiving waters. No treatment has been completed whatsoever. And so that is the whole purpose of these stormwater improvement projects, the trash capture amendment that is going to be talked about here shortly. That is to assist in cleaning up the debris, the chemicals, the stuff that is in stormwater before it hits the river, the outfalls, so we can help protect the habitat better.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are my questions.
So some of this is going to get further answered for you here in a little bit. Did you have? Okay.
Every time I think,
Does have a question. I see your hand up there, Tim.
yeah, every
I'm
time
sorry,
I think,
Tim, you have a question, correct?
Okay.
Yes, Mayor, I do.
Go ahead, sir.
Actually, I have a few, and so maybe it'll be covered in the presentation as we move forward, but, and I'm more than happy to accept that as a response. So want to talk a little bit more about what Vice Mayor Resendez brought up, and again, I don't understand the technical term, but I'm going to use the term fecal overload, or more than we are allowed to deposit. So I heard you say that we're dealing with that with education, but can you speak more specifically to what that looks like? And are there potential consequences if we don't resolve that? And that's my first of probably 4 or 5 questions, please.
Sure. So fecal coliform, that is runoff from fecal matter, which is most commonly, dog waste, which is, what is found around the streets and so forth. We're seeing a rise on it in homeless populations as well. As homeless encampments and so forth rise, you're going to start getting more and more fecal coliform hits from that perspective. So just as a precaution, that is coming up in other cities. But for the most part, in the city of Hollister, it is due to animal waste. So the public education, I don't specifically know, and maybe Mr. Miller could chime in a little bit more specifically on what the city has done. But that's where public education is the best policy, is informing people and encouraging people to use dog bag waste and properly throw them away, because picking up your dog waste and then just leaving it on the sidewalk for someone else to pick it up at another time doesn't do us any good. You want to throw it away, deposit it at the proper trash receptacle. But having it, so cleaning up after animal is essential. Is there a specific?
Yeah, mainly providing the dog bags at the parks, and then also just putting information in our water bills.
I'm wondering if there would be a way, maybe through our police department, through our animal control people, to maybe do some public service announcements, or some sort of announcements to our community. I mean, even on social media platforms, because this is the first I've heard of this, and based on what I've heard said, if it's predictable, it should be preventable. And now that I've heard it, I got to believe a lot of it could be predictable. And I certainly don't want to see us in a fine or a notice of violation circumstance for something like this. So my next question would be.
And actually, can I interrupt you with one other thing?
Yeah,
The other bird waste is also another, and that's not something that you can control. But other ways is street sweeping. Street sweeping is is one of the preventative ways to control trash and clean up other debris and so forth. So that is another, that's a staff operations. It's not necessarily public education.
Right, and so, thank you, that's a great idea. I know that in the past, we'd had earlier conversations during my time on council about acquiring a second sweeper, but that was never brought up, and so, for our city manager and staff, I would be interested in seeing what that may look like, and if, last time I recall, I think that street sweeper was about $250,000, but there may be a solid argument for a second sweeper. I know originally it was to deal with one that was aging and breaking down regularly, but thank you. I think that's a great idea, and I'd like to hear more about that, maybe from our staff. I want to ask you about ponding basins. I heard you say that there are 4 ponding basins within the city, and I believe I know where at least 2 or 3 are, but can you confirm where they are for me and talk about what the value is and the need? Because oftentimes when I see those, they just seem to be a waste of land to me, and I know that's not the case, but I'd like to know more about ponding basins and what your thoughts are.
Sure, you have 4 basins, and I'll have to probably call in Valerie, who is on Zoom, to tell me exactly, or Henry can probably identify where the exact locations of those are. Detention basins are necessary on the stormwater side. So specifically when it comes to post-construction requirements, which we're going to talk a lot more about, there is a need to maintain, meet the 100-year flood requirements. We've got to detain it on site. So there's a difference between a detention and a retention basin, or a terminal basin. So we've got 2 terminal basins where the stormwater goes in, and the stormwater does not come out. It stays in that basin, it percolates into the ground, and it goes down. We've got 2 non-terminal basins that the stormwater will go in. If it's on a low storm, those basins, that water will continue to percolate into the ground. If the stormwater, let's just say it's a 100-year storm event, it will overflow. It will get to a certain elevation where it'll go into an outfall pipe, and then that pipe will then outfall to the storm drain system and then continue on to the rivers. And so you've got 4 of those. Now, when we talk about post-construction requirements, and we're going to talk about the industrial wastewater treatment plant project and the benefits of that project and the watershed plan, one of the requirements when you have stormwater for post-construction now is that they have to meet through the 4 different PCRs, of which they've got to detain, and on site they have to match the pre and post-construction requirements. And they've also got to maintain a certain amount of stormwater on site. Well, this is key. A lot of the only ways that they can do that is through either a detention basin or underground infiltration basins. And so we're seeing more and more of these as you get more and more development, because they've got to retain the water on site. And Valerie is going to talk a little bit more about that in detail, about that discussion matter. They are maintenance projects, maintenance for the city, but they are a requirement by the Regional Water Quality Control Board.
Okay, and part of your comment actually leads to another question I have. So how does our future approved and future potential new development impact and or will it require us to alter this plan?
I'm not sure I follow the question. Can you repeat it again?
Yes. So how does our approved new development projects that are already approved potentially impact the plan that we're talking about tonight? And or how will the approved and potentially new plans alter this plan or force us to alter the plan?
So we're going to be talking about the watershed plan. We're going to be talking about post-construction requirements. We're going to be talking about the stormwater resource plan here shortly. All of these plans understand and relate the post-construction requirements. The post-construction requirements have been in place since 2013. So we have been planning for the post-construction requirements for years now. So all new development is already following these requirements, and we've accounted for it.
Okay, and so my understanding is the governor has just signed some legislation that's going to put a heavier burden on the city to build more housing. I doubt that you could have factored that into the plan, not knowing that that was going to happen, but will that require some additions to the plan as we move forward and figure out how we as a city are going to address those issues?
No, that is going to be on the engineer and the developer. The developer has to handle all stormwater compliance on site. So as they are thinking through their development project, they are going to have to understand how stormwater is impacted, what their size lot is, how much impermeable land they're going to have. It's going to then drive the calculations to determine what kind of stormwater compliance it's going to be, whether or not it's a detention basin, and how it's impacted. The Watershed Plan is going to help potentially with some future development on the San Benito River side of it. But that is really, it's an engineering problem, and it's being accounted for. All development has to account for it this time.
Okay, and so I presume that the county of San Benito also has the plans that we're talking about tonight, and I'm curious how their plan and our plan work in harmony, and where there may be some conflict or some need for a broader, bigger countywide conversation.
Sure. So the county is actually not under an MS4 permit. That is the biggest difference between the county and the city project. The city has to follow the MS4 permit, which means they have post-construction requirements. They have to follow the trash compliance. The county does not. The county only has to follow the construction general permit, which is not as intense as the PCRs. And so any project that falls in the county follows the county general permit and not, or construction permit, sorry, the county, or the general construction permit. And so that is where there has been some issues in when those projects come in, and if they do flow into the city, and the city then has to deal with it. So that is something that I'm working on with the county, and understanding that relationship, and knowing that if their stormwater flows into the city, it needs to follow PCRs as well.
And have you gotten some cooperation, and do they understand that position? And maybe a broader conversation for council and staff at another time, but a consequence if they disregard that, or there are issues that could have been prevented?
That is, so, the administration at the staff level has changed significantly over this last year. I am working with them. It is still, they're not under a regulatory compliance to follow the MS4 permit and the post-construction requirements. So it is definitely something that needs to be worked on and collaborated between the city and the county. But yes, I am working with them hand in hand on many projects.
Okay, thanks. Does the Department of Fish and Wildlife have a role in this process at all, or any say so?
Not really. No, the regulatory compliance is all from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Fish and Wildlife is going to have a play if, I'm sure they discussed, or they had comments on the post-construction requirements. Obviously, they benefit from the post-construction requirements, as it helps benefit the rivers and our streams, but they do not have a direct regulatory connection to it.
Okay, thanks. And I guess my final question, and you touched on this a little bit too, and maybe you'll explore or explain it a little bit more. I'm going to use lay terms that I'm familiar with. You mentioned something about 100-year storm plan, and so I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit more, either now or at some point in the presentation, regarding that.
Sure. When I refer to a 100-year storm, on the hydrology side, when you get a certain size storm, meaning a 1-inch storm over a 24-hour period, or a 5-inch storm over a 24-hour period, each storm is classified by a 1-year storm, a 2-year storm. It's basically the predictability of how intense that storm is over a certain duration of time. So a 1-year storm is a storm that you would see once a year. So we get many of those. So your storm drain system is sized, I believe your storm drain system is sized for 10-year or 25? 25-year storm. So your storm drain system is physically sized, and what we sized in the storm drain master plan is we sized your storm drain system to be able to handle a 25-year storm. That is a typical storm that a municipality would need to maintain. What happens though when you have a 100-year storm? That means that's your storm of all storms and there are starting to evaluate really 200-year storms as well. These are the storms that really can come in and inundate your infrastructure. What happens in your city when you have a 100-year storm event? We can't build the infrastructure underground to convey a 100-year storm. That is just cost, it is cost prohibitive. We cannot do that. But we have to have the street capacity to be able to convey the water so that we are not flooding buildings, which is the costly component of a storm event. We don't want to, raise up our streams, our creek beds so high, so fast. There's got to be capacity in the channel. So if you know anything about FEMA produces on the San Benito River, the Santa Ana Creek, it's going to have the 100-year floodplain. You cannot build infrastructure of any significance in a 100-year floodplain. You can have parks and miscellaneous recreational facilities in there. And that is because those river channels have to have capacity for the 100-year storm event. Your roads need to be able to convey the 100-year storm event off so that you're not flooding out a house. When you build a property, their house, their pad elevation needs to be above the 100-year floodplain. So these are things as engineers that we look at when we are designing a stormwater infrastructure and your development. So when we do plan checks for your developments, we check that hydrology and the hydraulics of your collection system to make sure that that water can be conveyed, that there's not a low point, that there's not a sump. And so you saw in one of those pictures, you saw a sump. There's a sump at 4th Street. It's where the water puddles and it can't go anywhere. Those are problems. Those are the things that we're trying to fix as part of those CIPs in the storm drain master plan.
Thank you for your answers. I appreciate it very much. It's very helpful. Mayor, thank you. That's my questions for now.
Let me maybe you could help visually. The storms of 96, 97, what did they rate at?
96 and 97.
Where we had a lot of rain and the river was knocking down some bridges. Do you know what that was rated?
Let me see if I can look it up while we're doing that, and I can get back to you.
Thank you.
Valerie, if you're listening, maybe you can look it up and text it to me. Or when she gets on here shortly, she might know the answer. Any other questions? All right, moving on. So Valerie's going to now talk about post-construction requirements. Go ahead, Valerie. Oh. She's still muted.
Good evening. Want to confirm that everybody can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. And thank you, Carrie, for the introduction. So tonight I will be talking about the post-construction requirements, otherwise known as the PCRs. And these are requirements that were developed by the regional board with the goal of reducing pollution that reaches our waterways and also minimizing erosion and other impacts to the creeks and streams. And these PCRs are required through your MS4 stormwater permit that Carrie was describing. Next slide, please. So first I'll go through a brief overview of what the post-construction requirements are. And they are a set of 4 different tiers, which each have a different level of care for stormwater. And the tier system is based on the amount of impervious surface that a project will create. And this is new or replaced impervious, which is important to understand because these requirements also apply to redevelopment projects. There are some exemptions for maintenance, such as repaving or overlaying an existing roadway. So tier 1 is called site design and runoff reduction. And tier 1 requires that you include some form of low impact development in your project. And that means trying to hold water on your site through directing runoff to a landscaped area, or possibly including what could be called a rain garden, a low-lying area on your site that would hold stormwater and not allow it to run off. Tier 2 is water quality treatment, and the regional board has identified a specific storm for which you have to treat all the runoff. And this can be done in a landscape-based feature, like some type of vegetated swale, which would be considered low impact development. That's what's preferred by the regional board. Or water quality treatment can be achieved in more of a mechanical means, which would be some type of filter system that would generally be placed underground in connection to your storm drain system. Tier 3 is retention, and this is where you're holding stormwater runoff on your project site. And the retention volume, the amount of runoff you would have to hold, is higher than the volume for water quality treatment. It's about twice the volume. So as you're going up in these tiers, you're also talking about managing larger volumes and larger rates of runoff. Tier 4 is what's called peak flow management, and Carrie spoke to this a little bit as well. This is where we would be trying to match a pre-development runoff condition. So in general, when you place impervious surfaces over the ground, you tend to increase the volume and the flow rate of runoff that's coming off of that land. And under tier 4, you have to hold some of that water back and meter it out slowly so that you're matching the existing conditions for peak flow. And it's important to understand with these tiers that the tiers are cumulative. So for example, if a project is large enough that it falls under tier 4, which most housing developments would fall under this tier, you also have to meet tiers 3, 2, and 1. Next slide, please. So the city has identified and understands that implementation, meeting these PCRs on each project site can be a challenge. And it's especially a challenge for project sites that have a more dense clay type soil to try to hold a lot of water on their project site. And so working with the city, we have been developing what's called a watershed plan. And that plan is specific for an alternative compliance for the post-construction requirements. So the PCRs are intended to be implemented on each project site. By having a regional program, such as a watershed plan, the PCRs can be met in a regional facility, such as a larger basin. And this has benefits for both the city and the community. Primarily for the city, what this will do is it will reduce the time and effort and complexity of your operations and maintenance program. Because as Carrie mentioned, for every stormwater facility that's constructed to comply with the PCRs, the city is now required to track the operations and maintenance and make sure that those facilities are maintained. And that has to be done minimum on a yearly basis. And that needs to be reported back to the regional board as a part of your MS4 permit. So as more developments are installing these types of facilities on each project site, that's increasing the number of facilities that need to be tracked and potentially managed by the city. If you can, rather than have these basins or swales or other features on each project site and accomplish that PCR requirement in a larger facility, you have fewer facilities to maintain. The watershed plan would also bring along an in lieu fee program, meaning that if a development chose to use alternative compliance, or rather than having stormwater facilities on their site, they would use a regional facility, then they would pay an in lieu fee that would correspond to the amount of impervious surface on their project site. So that in lieu fee program would pay for the installation and the ongoing operations and maintenance of these regional facilities. And the in lieu fee program also provides an avenue to generate funding for some of the CIP projects that were identified in the Storm Drain Master Plan that also benefit the alternative compliance through the Watershed Plan. One of the larger benefits for the community as a whole is that by implementing this Watershed Plan, the stormwater quality, specifically in San Benito River, will be improved as compared to implementing the PCRs on each individual site. And that is because the Watershed Plan is proposing to capture existing runoff that drains right now to the San Benito River, and infiltrate and treat that water prior to it reaching the river. And so we're taking runoff from developments that occurred prior to these PCRs that were not required to provide treatment or retention on site. And now we're cleaning it up before it gets to the river. And it's important to note that the city also has made a commitment to the Hollister Farms development for alternative compliance through this Watershed Plan. So we have at least one project that has been identified that the city has already allowed to follow that alternative compliance option. Next slide, please. So what the Watershed Plan is proposing is that, as I described, we would be diverting water that currently flows, or runoff, I should say, that currently flows to the San Benito River. And so the Watershed Plan would apply to any development that would occur within a watershed that drains to the San Benito River. And that diversion would occur by sending runoff to the existing industrial wastewater treatment plant, which is shown there on the left. And so the Watershed Plan proposes that Pond 2, which is an existing retention pond, would capture stormwater runoff. And then if needed, that stormwater runoff would be pumped to the existing percolation ponds and then percolate into the groundwater before reaching the river. Now, the primary diversion would occur at your existing storm drain outflow that currently discharges near Apricot Lane. The Apricot Lane outfall is just on the south side of Pond 2. And the primary diversion would be sending the runoff from that outfall to Pond 2 instead of the river. And we've also identified a few upstream locations where we could divert even more runoff through that Apricot Lane outfall. And one of the things to note about the Watershed Plan is it includes multiple projects that the city can choose to implement over time if they have enough interest from the development community to follow this alternative compliance plan. So it's multiple projects. They don't all have to be constructed. They can be constructed as development occurs and as it is needed. It's also important to note that the Watershed Plan projects would also benefit any city capital improvement projects that might trigger the post-construction requirements. So as an example, some roadway improvements like curb and gutter replacement or curb ramp replacement, even sidewalk replacement, can trigger the post-construction requirements. And those can be very challenging to try to fit in now new stormwater facilities within a right-of-way that may already be built out. And so in that case, the city will also really benefit from having this means of compliance, because rather than trying to fit new stormwater facilities within your right-of-way, you can use alternative compliance through this new facility at the industrial treatment plant. And I'm ready for the next slide. Thank you. So there are some programmatic requirements through the regional board that would come along with the watershed plan. First would be an alternative compliance ordinance. This would be a new section in your municipal code that would outline the requirements that developers would have to follow in order to use this alternative compliance program. Second would be the in lieu fee program. So this in lieu fee program would need to be developed and also codified that would specify what a developer will need to pay in order to use alternative compliance. There's also compliance tracking. So just like the city is required by the regional board to track operations and maintenance of PCR facilities, you also need to track how you are managing compliance if developers are choosing this alternative route. The city will also need to identify O&M procedures for any facilities that are used under this alternative compliance program, primarily the industrial wastewater treatment plant. So by using the industrial plant for PCR compliance, now the regional board has the authority to request O&M documentation for that facility, and that's important to understand. The regional board has also requested that the city commit to tracking ongoing performance of any stormwater basin that would be included in this regional plan, such as the Rustic Street Basin, which is pictured here on this slide. So the city would commit to, over time, tracking the infiltration in that basin to show to the regional board that it is, in fact, performing the way that it should be. And next slide, please. So where are we with the development of the watershed plan? We submitted a draft, our first draft, to the regional board back in 2015, and we have gone through a number of round of comments with them back and forth. And we are at a point to where the regional board has stated that with some minor revisions, they are ready to approve the plan. It's undergoing final city review right now for submittal to the regional board. And after that watershed plan is approved, the next steps would be development of the in lieu fee program, updates to the city's municipal code, and also developing and finalizing tracking procedures for how the city is going to manage and demonstrate to the regional board which projects fall under this alternative compliance option. And I'm going to talk briefly also about the trash amendments, and then I'll stop for questions after I get through this section. So similar to the post-construction requirements, the trash amendment is a requirement through the MS4 permit program. And the purpose of the trash amendment is to try to prevent trash and debris from entering a storm drain system. And the State Water Board developed the trash amendment, and now the city is in charge of implementing the trash amendment. And let's go ahead to the next slide. So in 2018, Wallace Group worked with the city to develop a compliance memo for the trash amendment to identify the path forward. The city at that time chose what's called a full trash capture system. And the intention is that a trash capture system would be installed at all of the major outfalls to either the San Benito River or Santa Ana Creek. Just of note is that the Bridge Road is the largest outfall, and that's the most northern outfall to the San Benito River. And what a full trash capture system is a mechanical device that would capture all particles 5 millimeters or greater. So that's really small. And so we're talking about down to the sediment level. And so here we're treating water for not only the large debris, bottles and trash and leaves, but also some smaller particles that may have entered that stormwater system. And these full capture systems are sized for the first flush storm, which Carrie had described. This is typically analyzed as a 1 year, 1 hour storm. And this is a typical storm that you might see during the beginning of the rainy season that would mobilize all these pollutants that have been collecting in the storm drain system and in the right of way. Next slide, please. Great. And so that's the end of my discussion specific to the PCRs and the trash amendment. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have before Carrie jumps into some more detailed discussion on where we are in design of some of these projects.
Is there any questions from anyone? Councilmember Resendez?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a couple quick questions. So in regards to the watershed plan, are there any more cons or downsides? I saw you talk about a lot of the pros, and then you did talk about some programmatic requirements, but are there any other cons or downsides aside from what you touched as far as the programmatic requirements?
Sure. So the one con I think that's really specific for the city is that the first project that we propose to implement for the watershed plan is the diversion of that Apricot Lane outfall. And that's a sizable project that diverts a sizable volume of stormwater. So there is some potential that we move forward with the watershed plan, we divert all that water, and then really there's maybe not a lot of buy-in from the development community that wants to use that alternative compliance option. So there is some potential that your in lieu fees, may not generate as much as we would like them to. And I think Carrie can talk a little bit more specifically when she gets into her section about where that project is in design and how it relates to some other stormwater requirements for the city. But in terms of cons, that would be the biggest one, is that you have to take a leap of faith per se to construct one of these projects, assuming you have one or two developers that want to buy in, and then you're counting on future developments to continue to pay those in lieu fees.
Thank you. Mr. Burns, did you have any questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'll hold my questions for later.
Thank you.
I do.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Price.
So my questions were on the full capture system. How big are these? I mean, because I'm sure, I don't know if you guys seen the 4th Street Bridge area. It is a lot of trash.
And
It's crazy.
we will actually talk about that one specifically here in just a little bit, so hold that question.
Awesome. Well, darn it, because you keep answering questions after I write them down. All right, so yeah, you will answer my questions.
I will answer that question.
I do have a comment. I'm not really in favor of the in lieu fee program. I think that Hollister Farms is a good example of what can go wrong for us on that type of a project. I think we're seeing now all these different ways to handle this. I think there was one of your pictures, I think one of the newer developments had some along their roadway, a catch basin with landscaping. I think it was Cobalt, maybe. You see a lot of these really good designs out there that are pretty, and it landscapes, and it's one of the things we talked about a while back of let's push the sound walls back so we can do all these things. We can have a bikeway, and we can have the landscaping and handle these areas, basic retention ponds, but they look beautiful. It's more natural rather than let's just find a way for a developer to get more land built on. It doesn't really make sense anymore. And I think it's important that we look at ways to do this without saying, well, okay, developer, we're going to find you a way to get more land to build on, instead of let's make our community prettier than what it is.
Absolutely. You're absolutely. The engineers are being very innovative, very creative on how to create a different The primary focus of the watershed plan was not because of that, because remember, the watershed plan only assists in PCR 3 and PCR 4, depending on where you are in the site. So PCR 1 and 2 still have to be treated on site, which is the water quality and the small storms. The difference is that some of your sites, specifically on the San Benito River side, fall on clay layers, of which do not percolate. And engineers are having to create basins. They are having to go down, actually the site that's just to the right of that lowest pond, I can't remember the name of that one. That project
Apricot, yeah.
had significant engineering challenges when it came to their percolation basins, meaning they had to install dry wells that were 25, 30 feet deep before they got below a clay layer where they could eventually percolate the water into the ground. And they had to backfill those. Well, then what happens to those over time? Sediment fills up, they no longer work appropriately, they're challenging, they become a long-term operations and maintenance issue. So the watershed plan is not necessarily meant for those projects that are can do it on site. They can create opportunities on site that are pretty, they can create parks, they can create open space, do that kind of infrastructure if they have the right planning. But sometimes projects are just technically infeasible, and you cannot build the infrastructure that is required from the PCR requirements. And this goes to show also, like what Valerie had said, you may have a city municipal project that will trigger the PCRs that you cannot comply with the PCRs because of land right-of-way, acquisition, whatever it might be, and it will trigger the PCRs and you're not going to be able to comply. This watershed plan provides you an opportunity to do an in lieu process that will allow you to, do an alternate process that will still allow you to meet the PCRs in a different way.
And that kind of is going to my whole point. Some areas shouldn't be developed. And that's really, instead of forcing it, it's like, well, it can't happen here for these reasons. We talked earlier, the county issue. Developers like going to the county because it's much cheaper to build there. So the county turns around and says, come on over, build. And then the city down the line suffers the consequences from it. That's why all this plan is so important. But if there's an area that just really can't absorb that, actually a lot of that area was farmland. So sometimes you don't want to change what's there because it makes more sense to keep it the way it is, rather than just saying, well, no, doesn't matter, we want to build 100 houses here, and here, go build something down the road and we'll send it to you. One way or another, at the end, taxpayers, we pay for it and we lose valuable land just to build more houses that shouldn't be built there. So planning is very important. I would definitely want to be seeing proposals or projects, definitely the ones in the future, that understand that and retain it all within the property. And again, when it's done right, it becomes a beautiful project rather than just squeeze everything in and let's get every inch we can. We've seen some new projects that got approved that there literally is 2 to 3 feet between the sidewalk to the sound wall. It looks more like a prison wall. So these are things we should never be doing. That's why I'm, in lieu of, always turns out to be, we end up paying down the road big time. And that's what I've seen in the past. So I love some of the designs and I want to see more of that. That conversation.
And the city's oftentimes in a rock between the hard place is, they're having to force affordable housing. The developers are trying to, you trying to meet your affordable housing, you're trying to meet open space requirements, all of that. So it is a balancing act. It's definitely where I would recommend that the city work with the developers to understand what your future goals of the city and the vision of the city are. The watershed plan is at a point where you guys, where we would love to make sure that the city is endorsing it, because it is a plan. It's not one that you have to implement every single project. It's available. The regional board is supporting it. You do need it for Hollister Farms. You all are aware of the notice of violation that the city has received. We have to implement that project to meet the Hollister Farm requirements. So so this is the plan that's helping us to get out of the notice of violation for Hollister Farms.
Let me finish real quick. And I'll go back to Hollister Farms because that is one project I can remember this conversation about, well, our goal, our plan is to just take all the water and run it to the ponds. And so why don't they do like everybody else? Let it percolate there on site. Oh, no, this would make more sense. That's a great example of what we should never do again. Never. And I was frustrated because I kept pointing out some of these problems, potential problems, and it was, oh, don't worry about it. This will all work out. And of course, the vote went through and it happened, but it came back and really bit us pretty hard. And the developer was willing to do all the things that were necessary originally. But because we chose to find a different way to do it for some crazy reason, we as a community are paying for it now. And I want to make sure anything we do, we don't come back to the community later and say, well, sorry, we're going to have to take more money now from the general fund or from whatever fund to do something because we allowed a developer to not do something. And that's my point, is I understand we have to do this for Hollister Farms, and I get we have to get this thing approved. What I'm saying is our focus should really be on any new construction, making sure it's all right there so we're not overloading the system in the future. Because that's, and again, Henry knows this, I've been talking about infrastructure for years and years here about the impacts of every single development, what it has on the pipes.
Yeah.
And I know pipes are underground so people don't see them, but there's an impact. Every foot costs money to maintain. And we need to make sure we don't stress the system out more because anything else we build over here is going to require a larger pipe over here. And that's when we have to pay the big dollars. And I'm happy that we're finally doing a plan and doing infrastructure. As was pointed out, all these years, it never happened. And now we're at that point, but I want to make sure that I get, again, that we have to do what we're doing, but I want to make sure that, in my opinion, that focus has to be on these different ways now and not hoping for a system to make it easier for a developer down the road. That just does not sit well for me any longer.
And one of the things that I would like to clarify is, and we're just about to talk about it, is the industrial wastewater treatment plant project and how that vision was started and how the watershed plan was started. It was started by an environmental reason to meet the trash capture requirements, the existing city infrastructure. It was the requirements to get the pollutants off the roads from existing development, not future development. With that, we then tied, there's a nexus between obviously existing development, future development. There was an opportunity to develop the alternative compliance that could provide opportunities to help support development if needed and support city projects if needed by bringing and allowing stormwater to be treated at the industrial wastewater project. So as we go through these projects, these are all projects that the city is being required to do because of the MS4 permit, not because of the watershed plan. It's the watershed plan that is a tool that is being followed behind to help support development and alternative compliance in the future, and to also help support operations and maintenance. So just wanting to make sure that it was not, the watershed plan development did not drive necessarily this whole process. It was the regulatory requirements and the MS4 permit that is driving what all of these projects are coming up.
Mr. Resendez, you had a comment?
Yeah, just real quick, I'm just wondering, the mayor brought up a good point about what the ground looks like. I'm just wondering if we have a map or do we have any visual that we can refer to as far as like where these trouble areas are, where there's clay and then you're not able to percolate the water, as opposed to where the water is able to be percolated. Do we have that for the city of Hollister at all? Is that something we can do?
Yes, there are hydrogeologists that we have geology maps that show the predominant soil types under the ground throughout the entire city of Hollister. And those are the locations where, that ground may be not as permeable as other areas.
I just think that's good to have when we're looking at
It's
future
readily available.
developments. Okay, maybe we can get a copy of that. That might be useful.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Appreciate it.
Any other questions before we move on? All right, so we're going to talk now about what stormwater projects are actually in design right now. So we've talked a lot about upgrades to the industrial wastewater treatment plant. I know I've worked with the city council for several years now. We've had issues and discussions about San Benito Foods and the industrial wastewater treatment plant project, okay? So let me just give a little bit of background on the industrial wastewater treatment plant for anybody who might not know the facility. Pond 1, as labeled on this picture, is exclusively used at this time for wastewater treatment by San Benito Foods. The city has been working over the last couple of years with an agreement with San Benito Foods. They are now the sole operator of that facility. The city is no longer operating and maintaining that pond. They operate it during they operate Pond 1 year round. They treat wastewater only during the summer months, June through end of October. And almost coming up
As of today, actually.
as of today.
They
Okay.
They finished today?
Maybe. So once they finish their canning season, then they continue to operate and maintain Pond 1, but they no longer then discharge. They, during the summer, are allowed to discharge their effluent to ponds 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those are your percolation basins. During the winter season, we are now, prior to this past year, Pond 1 used to overflow into Pond 2. Pond 2 would then pump to ponds 3, 4, 5, and 6. We bifurcated ponds 1 and 2. We said, San Benito Foods, you are only using Pond 1. They have made improvements to Pond 1 to allow for proper treatment of their effluent wastewater. The city is now retaining Pond 2 for stormwater capture. That Pond 2, we have gone through, we have desludged it. We are in the final throes of that project. We are getting it prepped and ready for the diversion project. The industrial wastewater treatment plant upgrades includes a full capture system, which you just heard, at the Apricot outfall, which is located at the southeast corner of that Pond 2. It is also going to include a diversion structure. So basically, we are going to send it through a full capture system. We are then going to send it through a diversion. It's going to go into Pond 2. Pond 2 is going to fill up if it gets, and then we are going to then pump that water out to the perk beds 3, 4, 5, and 6. During large storms, because we can only hold so much water in Pond 2, we cannot hold a 100-year storm. During the large storms, that water will outflow and flow back to San Benito River. Those are not the storms that we need to retain on site. We are only required by the PCRs and by the trash amendments to collect and treat certain size storms. So those storms will stay in the pond. The larger storms will overflow and go out to San Benito River. We have improvements to some of the overflows between ponds 3, 4, 5, and 6 to make sure that the water is being spread appropriately and that it's being percolated into the ground. We are also doing an upgrade at the end of South Street. I think that's right. Okay, I totally just blanked on that street. At South Street, where that line, the line coming down South Street is a combination sewer line for San Benito Foods as well as a storm drain. So during the winter, it's a stormwater line. During the summer, it's a wastewater line. That line, we are now going to put a diversion structure so that stormwater during the winter is going to flow directly to Pond 3. So that the stormwater goes to Pond 3, it does not go to Pond 1 where it infiltrates San Benito Foods' pond system. So those projects are being implemented. We're at 90% design. We're hoping to go out to bid by the end of the year. Obviously we will bring that project back to City Council for approval to go out to bid.
Real quick, Carrie.
Sure.
So per Sunny Slope, they were wrapping up this week for San Benito Foods.
Thank you. If you can go back real quick
Sure.
there. Currently, or the way it was working before for the winter season on South Street, that was going to which pond?
It was going to Pond 1.
It was going to Pond 1.
Yes, all
Okay.
stormwater going into South Street would go to Pond 1. It would get treated, pumped to Pond, or flow to Pond 2, and then out to Ponds 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Percolated from there.
Percolated from there.
So is Pond 2 now a percolation pond?
No, it'll remain a non-percolate, it'll remain a detention basin. And then we will pump to Ponds 3, 4, 5,
Why
and
not
6.
make that a percolation pond?
Because of the hydrology underneath, the flow of the gradient of the flow of the water flows under Pond 1, and we cannot compromise Pond 1. So we do not want to inundate the flow underneath Pond 1. Plus, you have an embankment to the east with the development. And without significant hydrogeology studies and geotechnical studies, we did not want to potentially impact the ground, impact infrastructure that was already there.
So 2 will go to 3.
2 will get pumped to 3, or 4, or 5, or 6.
Thank you.
So this project is currently in design. Andrea is going to come up and she's going to talk about the Stormwater Resource Plan and the Prop 1 grant that we are also in the process of doing.
Alrighty. Thank you, Mayor, council members. So to wrap up this workshop, I will be going over the Stormwater Grant Program and the recent application that the city applied for, and the subsequent work that was required based on that grant program. So the Stormwater Grant Program is through the California State Water Resources Control Board. Its primary mission is to promote beneficial use of stormwater and dry weather runoff in California. And it does this by providing financial assistance through funding available through Prop 1, which was Assembly Bill 1471, authored by Rendon. That authorized $7.5 billion in water projects, and of that total, $200 million in grant funds were allocated for multiple benefit stormwater management projects. So last year, round 2 of the Prop 1 grant funding was available for project applicants. In July of 2020, the city of Hollister applied for this grant funding, and the industrial wastewater treatment plant upgrades that Carrie was just describing were used as matching funds of $4.7 million. And the trash capture project for Bridge Road, which to reinstate, that's the largest watershed to the San Benito River, that was used as the grant fund. And earlier this year, the list of projects that were selected were published. Unfortunately, the city was not on that list, but we had discussions with the state. They said the application was favorably reviewed and that we were placed first on the standby list. So we're currently working with the state on that application. As part of that grant, there is a stormwater resource plan requirement. So a stormwater resource plan is a condition of receiving grant funds for stormwater and dry weather runoff projects. And this comes from the water code and is implemented from any bond approved by voters after January 2014. So the Division of Water Quality developed stormwater resource plan guidelines consistent with the water code provisions enacted by Senate Bill 985. And in these guidelines, there is a self-certification checklist, which there's just a screen capture of what that looks like. And these help guide local agencies and people preparing the stormwater resource plan to make sure that it is consistent with the water code and the state water board guidelines. So why is the stormwater resource plan important? Well, the key here for this type of plan is that it focuses on being a watershed-based plan. Traditional approaches to stormwater, like we've been talking about, typically include maybe limited treatment prior to the storm drain entering the storm, or the stormwater entering the storm drain system, and ultimately the receiving water bodies. The focus of a stormwater resource plan is to focus on the natural hydrology within the existing landscapes in order to increase stormwater capture and use, and really manage stormwater as a resource and not something to just treat and discharge into our receiving water bodies. So a stormwater resource plan encourages multiple benefit projects, and it also incorporates the broader water management goals of the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, the IRWMP, which in the city of Hollister's case is the Pajaro River Watershed IRWMP. So moving forward with the grant application, we started to prepare the Stormwater Resource Plan. In this case, it was the Greater Hollister Area Stormwater Resource Plan. So organization of this plan, this graphic here really outlines each of the chapters of the plan, and these are straight from the State Water Board guidelines. So we have the different planning objectives, the watershed characteristics, Water quality compliance issues, which is just a summary kind of what Carrie was talking about with the fecal coliform, the sediment. We identify the different stormwater projects, have an implementation strategy schedule, and talk about what we're doing here today, community education, public outreach. So the city of Hollister, it's important to kind of get a broad picture. City of Hollister is within the Pajaro River watershed, which spans the four counties and 4 water districts shown on this slide. The Stormwater Resource Plan guidelines are specific that the plan's boundaries should not just be based on city limits or political boundaries, but it really should encompass an accepted watershed delineation. Oftentimes, the state encourages the use of the U.S. Geologic Survey, or USGS. They have accepted watershed delineations. So that is what we ended up doing for the Greater Hollister Area Stormwater Resource Plan boundary. They're based on 8 different USGS watershed delineations, which are all listed on this slide. So really starting with the city of Hollister and working outwards, we encompass each of these watersheds because they are all affected by the city of Hollister and tributary to the Pajaro River. And also on this exhibit, we note the South Santa Clara Stormwater Resource Plan, Santa Cruz County, and Greater Monterey County Stormwater Resource Plans. So we really wanted to highlight agency collaboration. The City of Hollister is the submitting agency for when this plan gets submitted to the State Water Board. But we wanted to highlight that this has been a collaborative effort with City of San Juan Batista, San Benito County Water District, and Pajaro River Watershed Flood Prevention Authority. So for the identification of each of the stormwater projects, really back to focusing on that watershed-based planning approach in order to find projects that not only address water quality concerns, but also might have a flood control benefit, a water supply benefit, a groundwater management benefit. We solicited to the different local participating agencies to help identify stormwater, dry weather runoff capture projects to include in this plan. And that resulted in 8 projects, 3 programs, 4 opportunities. 5 of the projects are within the city of Hollister and directly benefit the San Benito River. And this exhibit shows some of the different project components for the city's identified stormwater projects. So with the identification of the projects comes the benefits analysis. Each project was broken down into a quantifiable metric, which is shown in the red table. Using results from the stormwater modeling that had previously been done, we looked at several other studies that had different hydrology and modeling results. And there's also multiple benefits. This gray table is straight from the Stormwater Resource Plan guideline published by the State Water Board. It breaks down the categories into water quality, water supply, flood management, environmental, and community, and those are broken down into main and additional benefits. So with that benefits analysis comes the prioritization of the different projects. If grant funding was secure, the project received 10 points. If the project was located on publicly owned lands, the project received 15 points. Quantitative metrics 4, multiple benefits analysis 2. And there was a total possible score of 100 points. And this here is the breakdown of our project prioritization table with each of those 8 projects. There's different categories and metrics on how the points were assigned. And I'm going to go through each of these projects here briefly. But it's really important to note that with this Stormwater Resource Plan, just the fact that these projects are identified in this plan, like I mentioned before, makes them eligible to receive that grant funding, regardless of their prioritization on this table. So moving forward with an overview of all the projects that were identified in the Greater Hollister Area Stormwater Resource Plan. We have the industrial wastewater treatment plant upgrades that were scored the highest priority based on, we have pollutant load reductions to San Benito River. We have the benefits to water supply through the infiltration of the percolation ponds, environmental benefits and community benefits in the upstream watershed area that actually has portions designated as disadvantaged communities. The next project is the Soap Lake Floodplain Preservation Project. This project was identified by the Pajaro River Watershed Flood Prevention Authority. And this is based on flood risk reduction project for the lower Pajaro River. It's included in this plan to control flooding in the downstream disadvantaged communities of Watsonville and Pajaro. And it does this by maintaining the existing environmental habitat through the purchase of conservation easements. Next up is the Pacheco Reservoir expansion. Now, this project was identified in the Santa Clara County Stormwater Resource Plan, but it was also important for us to note in the Greater Hollister Area Stormwater Resource Plan because this project directly benefits the Pacheco Creek, which the lower Pacheco Creek has portions in San Benito County and is within our Greater Hollister Area Stormwater Resource Plan boundary. So this project, by boosting the operational storage capacity from 5,500 acre feet to 140,000 acre feet, it has the ability to reduce peak flows in Pacheco Creek by 60% and also stabilize the drying of downstream wetlands in order to improve water quality and, as we mentioned, fish habitat. The next project is the San Juan Batista Wastewater Treatment Plant Project Regionalization with the City of Hollister Regional Domestic Wastewater Treatment Plant. This project was identified based on water quality benefits of reducing pollutant loads to San Juan Creek, which is tributary to San Benito River. And this project reroutes wastewater flows to the city's regional domestic wastewater treatment plant where it can be used as recycled water or for infiltration. Now this project, Bridge Road Trash Capture, as I mentioned before, this was the grant fund project in the city's largest watershed to San Benito River. We've talked about the trash flow capture systems prior to San Benito River, and this was identified as the largest watershed. So this project, like we mentioned, would capture those trash and debris of 5 millimeters or greater. So this really would reduce a lot of the pollutant loading that is seen in San Benito River. Next, we have the Nashua Diversion, and I'm gonna go ahead and tag on the San Benito Street Diversion too, because they're very similar. These were both identified as upstream diversions needed needed to divert stormwater to the industrial wastewater treatment plant. So this just has to do with existing stormwater flows, and instead of getting sent directly to San Benito River, where these projects are proposing to get sent to the industrial wastewater treatment plant for infiltration instead of sending that untreated water to San Benito River. The last project is Powell Street Underground Detention Project. This was identified in the city's storm drain master plan. And this project was identified to provide flood protection in this intersection in this area. And it has the potential to improve water quality if designed with a stormwater infiltration element. So those were a brief overview of the projects that were identified in the Stormwater Resource Plan. The next steps for this process is to submit this plan to the State Water Board for concurrence with the Water Code. Once we receive concurrence and approval with the Water Board, we will present to City Council for adoption of the Stormwater Resource Plan. And finally, the last step is to submit to the Regional Water Management Group for incorporation into the Pajaro River Watershed IRWMP. So that's a brief overview of the Greater Hollister Area Stormwater Resource Plan, and that's actually our conclusion to the stormwater presentation as well. I can take questions specifically on Stormwater Resource Plan, and Carrie can come up here too if there's more.
I'm sure there's lots of questions.
Yep.
We can go back to your question regarding Bridge Road if you would like. Okay.
Do you want me to go
Yeah,
back?
go back to that slide. Ooh.
So is that what that square building is?
Yeah, if you were to go out to Bridge Road, so the outfall is that little square, black square at the very end of that line. That is your current outfall. This line is 60 inch.
The storm drain line?
The storm drain line, the existing storm drain line,
42.
42 inch. So it's a pretty large storm drain. And again, this is the largest outfall. I don't know what the flow is exactly in CFS, but it is going to require 4 diversion structures. So those circles, so basically the way you understand this is it's gonna go into that first square. So the black line and the green line are your storm drains. The water's gonna flow from right to left, and it's gonna go into that first square. That first square is then going to take the low flows, the ones that we have to treat, the trash capture, which is the 1 year, 1 hour storm. It's going to send it to those other 2 rectangular boxes. From there, it is going to then go into those 4 the 4 circles. Those 4 circles are the full capture systems. That's where all the trash is going to create. Those circles are 8 feet?
Yeah.
8 feet in diameter. So you have 4 8-foot diameter manholes that are going to be underneath the street.
They actually, I think they're 12 actually based on that model. Yeah, 12 feet.
So this is a significant project, and this is why when we went after the grant funding, this project is very expensive, and it is one that the city has to do because of the trash compliance. So this is something that the city is mandated to do by the end of 2020.
I believe it was 2030.
2030. Okay, so by the end of 2030, this project has to be in place. It is right now $4.5 million in today's dollars is what we've estimated the cost of this project to be completed. So what when we worked with the city is we started working on the industrial wastewater treatment plant. There is a nexus in stormwater compliance and stormwater treatment that we figured out that the Prop 1 grant would allow for us to use the industrial wastewater treatment plant project, which is also a full capture system and an environmental need, and one to help existing city infrastructure and the cleaning of the water. We'll use that for matching funds, and we will then apply for grant funds for this one. So we have not started design on this because we cannot ask for grant funds reimbursement of anything that we've already spent. So we have to wait until we are awarded the grant before we can start design on this project. We've already done environmental on the project. We've got environmental clearance in the mitigated neg deck. The council has already seen that come through. It was done at the same time as the industrial wastewater treatment plant project. And we are just waiting for the state to give final approval on the grant. As Andrea said, we are first on the standby list. We had to wait for the state to determine whether or not they had additional funds available from the grant process in order to award the additional funds to the city. And so when we talked to them back in March, they said the likelihood is that the funds will be made available, but we have to wait until the next fiscal year budget, and understand where the funds are coming from. The state has subsequently already reached out to myself and Brett to talk about the project itself. We've had to resubmit some technical data. And they are just so backed up between their round 1 Prop 1 grants that are all ending right now, and the Prop 2 applications and all the contracts and everything else. They're just backed up. So we're just waiting on them to get approval for it. I truly do. I'm probably 95% positive that the city is going to get that $4.5 million, which will be fantastic. So it is a large project. This is just a conceptual design. Believe me, the final design is probably going to be very different. We don't know where the utilities are in the road. We're going to have to design around a lot of infrastructure there. So this is just a conceptual layout at this point.
So just one other question. So it's a trash capture. How do we know when to go empty it?
The city at a minimum will go and inspect it before the rainy season. And then after any major storm, probably after first flush, they'll go out and look at it. It'll have access manhole ports that they'll be able to go out, and they'll bring their pumper truck out and suck all of it out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Burns, do you have any questions?
I do, Mayor. Thank you. So you answered partially my question, which was going to be what is on the standby list. And what I'm hearing you say is there's a reasonable assurance that we're going to be awarded the grant funding. Did I see that the city also had to have matching funds? Did I see that correctly?
Correct. For for the Prop 1 grant, it's a 1-to-1 match. So every dollar of grant funds, the city has to have spent $1 of matching funds. So the industrial wastewater treatment plant project is your matching funds. So that project, all of those upgrades are the matching funds. We also used the 4th Street project, the stormwater improvements that occurred at the 4th Street project. Those projects, that money is also being used as part of the matching funds for the stormwater grant. So that 4.7 is not all, it's matching funds, it's not all the industrial wastewater treatment plant. We also there's administrative matching funds. We used, actually, I believe the city's CCTV, sorry. Used the CCTV camera and the pumper truck, some of the maintenance facilities. We use those as maintenance funds as well, or matching funds.
Okay, so then it's not like we need to come up with another $4+ million. It sounds like we've already spent that money for work that's been done that will be allowed to be used in lieu of the matching funds. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, the city has gone through the process. You have not technically spent the funds. You have not approved the industrial wastewater project for construction at this point. The city, that will still have to come back for city council approval once to go out to bid and to approve the construction contract. So in essence, yes, the city is moving forward with the project, but the city at any time obviously could still pull the project as well.
Okay. Is there anything else we can do to strengthen our probability of receiving the grant funding?
Really, at this point, the project is as strong as it possibly can be. One of the elements that we will have to get is we have to get the stormwater resource plan submitted to the state. One of the requirements of the grant is that stormwater resource plan must be submitted to the state within 3 months of notice of award. So we've actually had some opportunity since we did not get awarded in January like the others did. We actually had time to strengthen the stormwater resource plan, make it more regionalized, work with the Pajaro River Flood Management Group, work with the County San Benito Water District, San Juan Batista, and we made a better stormwater resource plan because we've had more time. They all were in support of us getting it in if we had been awarded earlier, but not actually being awarded the grant right off the bat allowed us some opportunity to strengthen that report to where when we do submit it to the state, we're hoping that the comments that we receive back are minimal because it is a very regionalized plan.
Also, Councilmember Burton, Kerry, you can kind of correct me. It was one of those things when we talked to them, they said that they couldn't guarantee us that we were going to get the funds, but that we were going to get the funds.
Pretty much.
So what I'm hearing you say is we're going to get the funds?
Exactly.
So, and I presume then we're on track with once we receive notice of award that we will hit that 3 months or sooner time deadline?
Correct. The report is done. The Pajaro Flood Management Working Group or Flood Management Group has already approved the report, which is they are one of the major contributors to it. We are going to be presenting the report also to San Juan Batista and the county here shortly. The city, we really just need, we wanted to do this workshop and then we wanted authorization from the city to have us send it to the state for review of it. Once we get their comments and once they approve it, we will bring it back, since you are the submitting agency, we will bring it back to City Council for formal adoption. But yes,
Okay.
we are in track. We are on track, absolutely, for submitting it within that 3 months.
Okay. And Mr. Miller, do you forecast the need for any additional staffing as a result of an award of this grant?
Yeah, we'll probably need, I'm looking at Henry, he's shaking his head, yes, we need staffing. But yeah, it'll be like for the back trucks that need to suck out this trash and to monitor the lines.
Okay, it'd be helpful maybe to have a better understanding of what that looks like as well moving forward. And I don't know if 3 months is a reasonable target for that, but at some point moving forward, I think we need to have that conversation. And I would argue relatively soon, but relative being 3 months or in that time frame. And I'll defer to you for your judgment in that regard. Also wanted to speak for just a moment on the watershed plan. And I philosophically, I find myself aligning with the mayor in this case where I am not a huge advocate for the in lieu of fee plan or program. I understand that in the case of the one commercial project, that it was a necessary response. But I'm wondering if there is some language specific to the plan that we're going to submit. If we need to, I don't know what the right words are, but a last option in my mind would be the in lieu fee program, because I do think we get some compromised projects that might be better placed in other spots or not developed at all. And so I don't know, to be clear with the development community, if that kind of language would be appropriate in a plan or just a generic discussion of it in the plan. And so I trust in your judgment as the professionals to make that call, but I wanted to push that out.
So let me make sure that everybody is clear. The watershed plan and the in lieu fee are completely two separate administrative issues. The watershed plan is a requirement that the regional board brings forward to us as an alternative compliance. It is a plan that the regional board is going to approve. The city, on how they implement the watershed plan, is a completely different transaction. You have the plan approved by the regional board. The regional board is giving you the authority as the permitting agency to either allow development to utilize the watershed plan for alternative compliance or to continue to maintain PCR requirements per the original regional board requirements. It does not in any way require you, once you've approved the watershed plan, give full right to the development to be able to use that watershed plan. That is still the purview of staff and council to authorize the use of the watershed plan for PCR requirements. It's just giving you an alternative option. So whether or not the city implements an in lieu fee is completely at the sole discretion of the city council. How you want to pay for it, how you want development to pay for it, that is up to the city council in the future. The regional board has absolutely no say or desire to get involved in that. The only thing they are concerned with is that the PCR requirements are being implemented, whether or not at the regional facility or on site. They don't care if you have a watershed plan, as long as those PCR requirements are being implemented.
Thanks. I appreciate the clarification, and I like your language, at the sole discretion of the city council. I think that's important to express as well, because we all know that sometimes when people see things, they think because it's not restricted, it's permitted, and or it's permissive. And so I really would like to see some clear and consistent language to show that it's not an entitlement, it's an alternative of last resource, as far as I view it, based on what I've heard you said at this point. So thank you for your clarity. I appreciate it. Thanks for your response. I think you had a great presentation. I'm not smart in this area, but I'm a little smarter today than I was yesterday, and I thank you for that. Mayor, that concludes my questions and comments. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions from council over this side?
Just a real quick
Before I'm
comment.
going to mind. Go ahead, Mr. President.
Excuse me. I just wanted to thank you, because every time I came up with a question, you guys just went right ahead and answered it. So it's